The Haavara Agreement emerged when Nazi policy was pushing German Jews out of public life, while the Zionist movement was urging Jewish migration to Palestine. Both sides saw a practical interest. The Nazis wanted Jews removed from German society, and the Zionists needed people and capital to build a future state. After months of talks between the Zionist Federation of Germany, the Anglo-Palestine Bank, the Jewish Agency and German economic officials, the agreement was signed on August 25, 1933. It let German Jews move to British-controlled Palestine by converting part of their assets into German-made goods that were shipped there. This arrangement helped about 60,000 Jews leave an increasingly hostile Germany, strengthened the yeshiv's labor force and economy, and helped Germany weaken the global anti-Nazi boycott. The deal had strong backers such as Hjalmar Schacht, Chaim Al-Lossorov, Chaim Weizmann or David Ben-Gurion, but it was divisive from the start. Within the Nazi hierarchy, some saw it as a practical tool, while others, like Heinrich Himmler or Joseph Goebbels, opposed any cooperation that might strengthen a Jewish homeland. Among Jews, criticism especially came from Zaev Jabotinsky's revisionist Zionists, who were leading the worldwide Jewish economic boycott of Nazi Germany. They saw Haavara as a direct betrayal that funneled money and goods into Hitler's economy. Anti-Zionist groups in Europe and the US that opposed immigration to Palestine entirely also didn't like it. The internal Nazi dispute continued until 1938, when Hitler decided Jewish immigration should go on. The outbreak of World War II did not end all contact. In 1940-41, the radical Zionist group Lehi, led by Abraham Stern, sought an alliance with Nazi Germany. Convinced Britain would block Jewish independence, Stern offered support against the British in exchange for German backing for a Jewish state. Germany ignored the proposal. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was a secret 1916 treaty between Britain and France with Russian and Italian consent, outlining how they would carve up the Ottoman Empire after World War I. France was granted Lebanon and parts of Syria, southern Turkey and the Kurdistan region. Britain took Iraq, the Persian Gulf and parts of Jordan and Israel. Russia was promised western Armenia and Constantinople, and Italy received southern Anatolia. For Palestine, an international zone under joint control was proposed. But the agreement was kept secret from Arab leaders, even as Britain encouraged Arab revolts against the Ottomans. The drawn borders ignored ethnic and religious realities, fueling resentment among Arabs and Kurds, and contradicting promises made in the McMahon-Hussein correspondence for a united Arab homeland in exchange for supporting the Brits against the Ottomans. Its existence was revealed in 1917 by the Bolsheviks. The Sykes-Picot Agreement is widely seen as a cause of modern Middle Eastern instability. It created artificial states that ignored local populations. Even ISIS, when proclaiming its air quotes caliphate in 2014, symbolically declared it was smashing the Sykes-Picot borders as the ultimate colonial betrayal. The Balfour Declaration was a 1917 statement by the British government expressing support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, then under Ottoman rule. Issued in a letter from Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to the leader of the British Jewish community, Lord Rothschild, it marked the first major international recognition of Zionist aspirations. While welcomed by Zionists, the declaration was deeply controversial for Arab Palestinians, who saw it as a betrayal of promises for Arab independence made in the Hussein-McMahon correspondence. They also viewed it as a colonial act that disregarded their political rights of self-determination. It ignored the local population's wishes and conflicted with French agreements under Sykes-Picot. The boundaries of the proposed Jewish homeland were never clearly defined, and the British later clarified it was not intended to cover all of Palestine. The declaration significantly boosted Zionist support worldwide, became central to the British mandate for Palestine, and indirectly led to the creation of the State of Israel. Many consider it a principal cause for the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919, and formally ended World War I between the Central Powers and the Allies. Shaped mainly by the big three Allied powers, it excluded Germany from the negotiations, but they were forced to sign under threat of invasion. The treaty imposed heavy territorial, financial and military penalties. Germany had to accept full responsibility for the war under the War Guilt Clause, for a war they didn't even start. It lost 13% of its European territory, all overseas colonies, and millions of ethnic Germans were stranded outside the new borders. The Rhineland was occupied and demilitarized, the Saar placed under League of Nations administration, and Germany's army capped at 100,000 men, with no air force and 6 battleships. Reparations of 132 billion Goldmark, which is around 269 billion US dollars, strained their fragile economy, contributing to hyperinflation, unemployment, unrest, and social collapse. These harsh terms generated a long-lasting resentment and created the conditions that extremist groups, including the Nazi Party, later exploited. The treaty is often considered one of the main reasons for World War II. The Munich Agreement of September 1938 was reached by Germany, Britain, France and Italy. It allowed Germany to annex the Sudetenland, a border region of Czechoslovakia with 3 million ethnic Germans. Tensions escalated after Germany backed the Sudeten German Party and later formed the Sudeten German Freikorps, which carried out cross-border attacks to destabilize Czechoslovakia. Britain and France, unwilling to defend the country and led by appeasement politics, pressed Prague to give up the territory. Chamberlain met Hitler in mid-September and proposed transferring areas with a German majority, forcing Czechoslovakia to accept without being consulted. Hitler then raised further demands, insisting all Czechoslovaks leave the Sudetenland, prompting mobilization in Europe. A 4-power conference was called in Munich, excluding Czechoslovakia, and the resulting agreement allowed German occupation of the Sudetenland. France and Britain told Czechoslovakia to accept the terms or face Germany alone. The agreement was followed by the First Vienna Award, which handed southern Slovak lands to Hungary, and soon after the rest of Czechoslovakia was occupied by Germany, Italy and Poland. Although many Europeans initially saw the deal as a way to avoid war, it's now seen as a failed act of appeasement that enabled Hitler's expansion. Even though ethnic arguments existed, the coercive nature of the agreement and its role in Nazi territorial aims make it widely regarded as illegitimate. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was a non-aggression agreement between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, signed in August 1939. Negotiated by foreign ministers Vyacheslav Molotov and Joachim von Ribbentrop, it committed them to avoid conflict with each other and to not support any enemy for 10 years. However, a secret protocol divided Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. Poland was to be partitioned. Latvia, Estonia, Finland and Bessarabia, modern-day Moldova, were assigned to the Soviets. Lithuania was placed in the German sphere, except for the Vilnius area. The existence of this protocol was not proven until the Nuremberg trials. 9 days after the pact was signed, Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. The USSR invaded from the east on September 17th, completing the partition. The agreement suited both powers. Germany avoided a two-front war, and Stalin gained time to annex more territory. The pact also strained German-Japanese relations, reducing Soviet worries about a conflict in Asia. Stalin's occupation of Bukovina in 1940 went beyond what had been agreed, but the pact remained technically in place until June 22, 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa. The Yalta Conference, held in February 1945, brought together Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin to decide how post-war Europe and Germany would be reorganized as the Allies closed in on victory. The leaders agreed to divide Germany into 4 occupation zones controlled by the US, Britain, France and the Soviets, with Berlin split the same way. Germany would be fully demilitarized and denazified and made responsible for reparations. They also issued the Declaration of Liberated Europe, promising that nations freed from Nazi rule could form their own democratic governments, and they discussed Poland's future, though Stalin refused to return the territory he had taken in 1939. The conference effectively recognized Soviet dominance over Eastern Europe. Although Yalta called for free elections, Stalin installed communist governments in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary and other states, breaking the spirit of the agreement. Critics argued the Western leaders conceded too much. Some also highlight the influence of advisors like Alger Hiss, seen as overly trusting of Soviet intentions. The settlement over Poland remains one of the most disputed outcomes, accusing the West of selling out the country due to a lack of alternatives. As Soviet actions made clear that free elections wouldn't occur, American and British opinion turned sharply. The early Cold War quickly exposed the limits of the Allied cooperation, and Churchill's Iron Curtain speech captured how Yalta came to symbolize the division of Europe. The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed in 1494 between Spain and Portugal, divided newly discovered lands outside Europe along an imaginary line west of the Cape Verde Islands. It was directly approved by Pope Alexander VI. Spain gained rights to territories west of the line. Portugal controlled lands to the east. The treaty ignored other European powers, who rejected the Pope's authority to grant exclusive exploration rights and saw it as an attempt by Spain and Portugal to monopolize the world. Its geographic basis was also flawed, leading to disputes. A renegotiation moved the line west, giving Portugal claim to Brazil, and enforcement was also inconsistent, as Spain later colonized areas like the Philippines, technically in the Portuguese zone. The treaty literally gave Spain and Portugal the right to conquer, enslave, and convert any non-Christian peoples they found. It shaped the future of colonialism and influenced the modern borders of countries such as Brazil. The Treaty of Nanking, signed on August 29, 1842, ended the First Opium War between Britain and the Qing dynasty, which was caused by Britain flooding China with opium. The treaty forced China to cede Hong Kong to Britain, pay Britain a large sum of money, open ports to trade, and legalize opium imports, marking a significant erosion of Chinese sovereignty. This led to addiction issues and social and economic disruption in China. It also granted British citizens immunity from Chinese law. The treaty was negotiated under the threat of British warships in Nanking. The Berlin Conference concluded in February 1885 with the signing of the General Act of Berlin. It formalized how 14 European powers could claim African territory. No African leaders were invited, and the major powers agreed on rules for effective occupation, which accelerated the scramble for Africa. Although the conference didn't draw all modern borders, it set off the process that carved the continent into colonial zones. European nations essentially divided Africa among themselves, ignoring African sovereignty. This led to resource theft, forced labor, and atrocities such as King Leopold II's genocide in the Congo Free State. The artificial borders created during and after this period still contribute to political instability and conflicts across Africa today. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in 1848 and ended the Mexican-American War, a conflict widely seen as an aggressive expansionist move by the United States. Mexico signed only after US forces occupied its capital, and the treaty required Mexico to surrender 55% of its territory, including what is now California, Nevada, Utah, most of Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. Mexico also gave up its claims to Texas and accepted the Rio Grande as the border. The US paid $15 million and took on certain Mexican debts, but the payment was symbolic given the scale of the land loss. The treaty promised rights and citizenship to Mexicans in the ceded lands, but these protections were inconsistently honored, leading to widespread discrimination and land dispossession. The enormous territorial gain intensified the US debate over slavery and helped push the country toward the Civil War. In Mexico, the loss destabilized the government, fed political extremism, and contributed to civil war later in the decade. The territorial changes also led to an increase in violent clashes between Native Americans, American settlers, and the US Army. The Asiento de Negros was a series of contracts from the 16th to 18th centuries where the Spanish crown licensed foreign companies to supply enslaved Africans to Spain's American colonies. Spain outsourced the trade instead of running it itself, turning the trafficking of human beings into a formal commercial contract. Different European nations competed for this deal, and the 1713 British Asiento was the largest, giving Britain the exclusive right to deliver 4,800 enslaved Africans per year to Spanish America. The agreement helped expand the transatlantic slave trade to its peak, reduced people to quotas, and generated huge profits for the empires involved. Its impact was catastrophic, driving mass enslavement, high mortality, and long-lasting trauma. It remains one of the most notorious deals in world history, treating the sale of human lives as a legitimate international business. The Oil for Food program set up by the UN in 1995 let Iraq sell oil to buy food, medicine, and essentials for civilians without strengthening Saddam Hussein's military. It aimed to reduce the suffering caused by UN sanctions aimed at demilitarization imposed after the Gulf War, which had crippled Iraq's economy and harmed ordinary citizens. But the program became highly controversial due to widespread corruption and betrayal. Saddam's government manipulated contracts to demand kickbacks, reportedly skimming around $1.7 billion, while some UN officials and global companies took bribes and profited illegally. And despite oil sales, Iraqi civilians continued to starve. The UN's humanitarian system was exposed as a fraud that enriched elites at the expense of the people.